I am live. I'm reading Time Out of Mind, which is the autobiography of Joan Grant. And this last chapter was sad because Esmond passed away, and she already knew about it, because one of the reasons why she wrote this book is she is explaining about far-sight memories and reincarnation. And she demonstrates in this book that she has a gift of knowing, and it was very sad, had me moved to tears almost. We are in the 1920s, and she needs to get away to clear her head, and her friend Kirstine was suggested by her father, and so she is taking off with her friend. It is chapter 10. It's entitled Homecoming. I was glad that Kirstine could not drive a car, for having to steer it through the traffic made it easier to keep a tight rein on my emotions as we drove out of London. Esmond is dead, and there is no use talking about it, she said firmly. If you had only had the sense to confide in me, I would have made you swear not to tell anyone that you'd been to bed with him. Really, Joan, how could you have been so idiotic as to tell your parents? Won't you ever learn sense? It was cold comfort, but honest, and I accepted it, although I was surprised that Kirstine should also consider adultery to be so devastatingly important. Oddly enough, no one ever pointed out to me that adultery requires one of the parties to be married. Perhaps they thought it was an euphemism for fornicatress. Kirstine and I had often discussed what fun it would be if only our parents would let us go off alone for a motor tour. So I was determined that she should enjoy it, even if I could never enjoy anything again. Somehow I would keep up face so that she would not feel that she was sharing a funeral car in the wake of a hearse. I was doing quite well until we stopped for tea at a cottage on the banks of the river Thames, somewhere beyond Henley. I got out of the car, felt dizzy, and before I could put my head between my knees, fainted face downwards in a flower bed. Kirstine and the kind woman who owned the place decided that we should spend the night there, which we did, on a feather bed in the attic. In the morning I knew that the pistol, which, had I only listened to father, would have been safely at the bottom of the sea, had killed Esmond. I saw him, in dress trousers and a soft shirt, but without his dinner jacket, staring at something lying on the floor of his room. He was not frightened, only bewildered, puzzled, and above all angry with himself. I can't have been such an ass as not to have noticed there was still one up the spout. It could have been too idiotic, he was saying. The thing on the floor was his dead body. 2 days later, Leslie, who had been to Paris for me, confirmed that Esmond and 3 friends had decided to go to a shooting gallery after dinner. They were all laughing and talking while Esmond looked for his pistol and began to clean it. He'd taken out a clip of bullets, but one was in the chamber. It went through his left eye and killed him instantly. It was so clearly an accident that there was no need even for a formal inquest, except for the one brief glimpse of what had happened. Night after night passed with no sight of him. It was difficult to sleep, so I learned quantities of poetry, Rupert Brooke and Keats, to interrupt the beat of my thoughts. Whenever I wilted, Kirstine made me drink half a bottle of Emu brand Burgundy, rich in iron, with my dinner. I didn't like the taste, so readily agreed that it must be very healthful. Sleep and the chance of meeting Esmond came sooner if I was tired, so we drove at least 9 hours every day, exploring side roads and unfrequented tracks, as a bad surface was an advantage because it demanded more of my attention. From the Lake District we went to Inverness. North of Perth the road was in such ill repair that we seldom managed to average more than 10 miles an hour, and then we went south through Fort William and Glencoe. I wanted to visit Glencoe because I thought I might catch echoes of the massacre there, as I was a descendant of Rob Roy MacGregor. It was a very slender thread and produced no results whatsoever, but I had grasped at it because I hoped that any kind of second sight might break down the barrier that was hiding Esmond from me. Both Mrs. Workman and Mother had insisted that we were able to receive letters from them, so we wired the names of towns where we would collect mail poste restante. Mother's letter were brief and signed B. Marshall, reiterating that Father was finding it difficult to forgive me. The day before Kirstin, who had not been able to get permission to stay any longer, went back to Hayling by train from Reading, I had another letter from Mother. Daisy and Elfie Sartorius called here yesterday to look at the garden. They came here with Sir Alfred Turner, Iris' godfather, before the war, but you would have been too young to remember them. I had to warn them not to mention you in front of your father, and they invited you to stay with them until he is ready for you to come home. The address is Hurtwood, Holmesbury, St. Mary, between Guildford and Dorking. Behave discreetly and do not take them into your confidence. They are both spinsters and could not be expected to take a lenient view on what you have done. So now I was to be further humiliated by being sneered at by spinsters. I only had £2 left, but this lasted for 3 days. 7 shillings for bed and breakfast at Cyclists' Welcome. Other meals were buns and tomatoes. Buns because they are more filling for the money than any other food, and tomatoes in case I got spots through lack of vegetables. An adulteress with pimples would be even more an object of derision. I was down to my last 10 shillings when I drove up the steep lane towards Hurtwood. 10 shillings I must keep so as to be able to tip the housemaid. I stopped the car when I was at the crest of the hill, half a mile beyond the drive gates. It was very calm and beautiful evening, but I was in no mood to be beguiled by beauty. I was alone. Even Esmond had left me. It would become even harder and more self-sufficient than I had learned to be in the last 3 days. I would make an armour for myself from bitterness and disappointment and hatred of everyone who thought being an adulteress was sordid and wicked. And, strong in hatred, I would fight the world single-handed and bear it at its own cruel game. If I hated enough, I would at least be able to salvage my pride, the pride I used to have when I had the decency to conceal pain, when no one saw me cry. Pride, I said bitterly. What pride have I left when I'm exposing myself to the patronage of elderly spinsters, because I've not got the guts to use the last gallon of petrol in the car to find a lonely wood or deserted common where I could starve to death in a decent privacy. I stuffed out my cigarette. I blew my nose and powdered it. Then, because my eyes were still brimming with self-pity, I dug my nails into my thigh until the blood ran, so punished my body for betraying me. I drove the car so fast that the tires screeched on the gravel through a tunnel of beech trees whose smooth grey boles were buttresses to a curtain wall of rhododendrons. It brought me to a wide courtyard. To the west, the house, honey-coloured, stone hung with clematis and roses. To the east, a balustrade with a lawn beyond. To the south was a long pool of water lilies, and beyond it, so steeply did the hillside fall away, only the sky and the wealth of Sussex revealing far below me its gentle distance to the horizon of the South Downs. As I got out of the car, a flurry of white doves swirled down from the roof tree to feed on corn, which was being scattered for them by their mistress. And I knew her. I knew that smile, those wise grey eyes. Long ago, when I was a child, having my hair done before going to bed, she came into my room, took the brush, and used it gently to untangle the knots with which the impatient nurse had been tugging at. Then she sat talking to me while I drank my hot milk. Even as Daisy walked towards me, I tried hard to harden my heart. Careful, Joan, if you let yourself love anyone, you will only be hurt again. She welcomed me as though it was quite natural for me to be there, as though I had often been there before. But this, of course, was her instinctive courtesy to a guest, even to a guest whom she had asked only as a favour to Mother. It was nearly 6 o'clock, so I had had tea, which was not true. So I said I had had tea, which was not true, because I had eaten the last of the buns at midday. "Then I expect you would like a bath before dinner," she said, and took me up the broad oak staircase to my room. The windows were wide open to the blue distance and the scent of azaleas mounted from the hillside. There were flame-coloured and orange and white azaleas in pottery jars from Portugal, in the room too, and a blue bowl of lilies of the valley by my bed. A kindly grey-haired maid chatted while she unpacked. Then she turned on the water in the bathroom next door and told me that by the time I was ready, she would have pressed a dress for me to wear. There were 3 kinds of florist bath essences to choose from: verbena and hyacinth and rose geranium. It was very comforting to lie in hot, scented water. The bath was so long I could have just only touched the end with my toe. After having had to wash in bits in the basin, I felt good. I washed my hair and dried it on one of the huge bath towels that were warming on the hot rail. There was no need to hurry. Dinner was not until 8. Elfie, Daisy's elder sister, had been out when I arrived, but she too was there when I came downstairs. She was not tall like Daisy, but brown and plump and gay as a robin. Friendly as a robin too, as she gave me a glass of sherry and chatted so that I didn't have a chance to feel shy. During dinner I tried to forget that tomorrow, instead of eating delicious food in company, I should be feeding on buns again, entirely alone. I could not even salve my conscience with the excuse that I'm going away. I was choosing suicide by starvation. That in going away I was choosing suicide by starvation. For while I was dressing, I had realized I could pawn my wristwatch. It was gold and ought to be worth a tenner, which would keep me until I could find a job. I could not possibly be discreet, as Mother had counselled. Secrecy might be permissible with enemies, or even acquaintances, but it would be cheating to conceal the truth from friends. And they were friends, both of them. This I already knew, but such new friends could not possibly be expected to be more tolerant of me than my father. After dinner, we had coffee on another terrace to the west of the house. It was also the roof of the billiard room, for Herdwood was built in an old stone quarry, so that from all its 3 stories you could walk directly into the garden. "I want to show you the fan garden," said Daisy. "It is at its best in the evening light." It was quite a long way from the house, in a natural amphitheatre. The sticks of the fan were yew hedges, and between them were herbaceous borders radiating up the slope. Then a smooth curve of turf, and above it a stone colonnade hung with vines and clematis, roses and wisteria. Where a hand would have held the fan, there was a white stone pool and a fountain, and behind it 6 stone pines, 80 or more feet high, stood as sentinels to the distance. The peace and beauty of it made me feel almost unbearably unhappy. In a moment I must say the words which would drive me into exile. Could I keep silent for just another day, even for 2 days? I pleaded with myself. If only I could be here just for a little while, I could get my courage back. Even if I have to sacrifice the last of my pride by staying here under false pretenses, it would be worth it. I need courage to tackle the world even more than I need my pride. You cannot gain courage by behaving like a cheat and a coward, I said to forlorn little Joan. Go on, tell her, end the suspense, and then go and pack your suitcase. I cannot stay here, I said abruptly to Daisy, who was telling me how she had brought the blue cedar as a seedling 20 years ago from Sikkim. I cannot stay here, I repeated more loudly. It was dishonest of me even to stay for dinner. You see, I am an adulteress. Daisy looked at me and her eyes were gentle. Are you, my dear? She said. How lovely for you. I never had the chance. And so in Daisy and in the garden of Herdwood I knew I had at last come home. Daisy knew about grief. She had loved Bunny, her only brother, who had been killed in 1915, more than I loved Esmond, for she had a much greater capacity for affection. Since childhood they had wanted no other companion. Together they had gone plant hunting in many parts of the world, and were probably the first Europeans to see the blue Himalayan poppy. We were camping on the edge of the tree line, she said. Bunny was riding ahead of me over a pass when suddenly I heard him shout, "Daisy!" So I urged my pony into a canter. It was nearly as tired as I was, poor little beast. When I reached him, he had dismounted and was staring, spellbound, at what I at first thought was a turquoise blue lake. But it was poppies, millions of them. I'd never seen anything more beautiful. We collected seed, but it was not ripe enough to germinate, and the plants we brought back died before they reached Kew, in spite of all the care we lavished on them. So they are called Meconopsis Bailey instead of being Sartorii. Ballooning was another hobby they had shared. The stillness was so wonderful, such utter peace, she said reminiscingly. Sometimes it was more exciting than peaceful, when we started to drift out to sea, for instance, and were halfway to France before the wind changed again. Several times we had to throw out more than the sandbags to prevent ourselves hitting a hill. The picnic basket always went first, and then the cushions and our coats. I remember the first time we took my father up with us. He thought we were going to run into a church steeple and shouted, "Jettison everything!" I had been brought up as a soldier's daughter. Both he and my uncle, Reginald, were major generals and won the VC, so I obeyed automatically. I threw his field glasses out of the basket. He was so cross that he refused to speak to me for the rest of the day, until he heard that the chauffeur, who used to follow us with the car, had found them dangling undamaged from a tree. We had been talking about Bunny again a few days later, when she said, "You must be more courageous than I was, for I never dared to give my whole heart to anyone again. But it hurts too much. No one can expect us to risk being so terribly hurt twice in one lifetime," I protested. "Being hurt is not really so very important. It is at least much less important than hurting other people. I would like you to ask some of your young friends here, Leslie, for instance, who you say has been kind to you." "Oh, Daisy, please not." "Well, have him down as soon as you can. It would be selfish to deny him the pleasure of seeing how much better you are, and he would also enjoy the garden." So later on, Leslie came to see me, and Douglas, and Kirstine, and Diana. It was an effort to keep up face with them, but practice made it easier. I thought I would be cured of the shaming betrayals of sorrow now that I was at Hurtwood, but I still found myself vulnerable to sudden freshets of tears, to being utterly unable to swallow because choked by a hard lump of misery. But to Daisy, these were only symptoms which, instead of being reprehensible, were quite natural. Even a broken leg takes time to mend, and a broken heart takes longer before it is serviceable. Don't force yourself, dear child. Allow time for the process of healing. There will always be a scar, but honorable scars are not disfiguring. For the first time in my life, I was not only allowed but encouraged to obey my instincts. If I did not feel hungry, I did not come for a meal, but food was left in the dining room so that I could eat it when I felt like it. No one tried to make me eat, but every night there was a thermos of soup, sandwiches wrapped in a napkin, fruit in my bedroom. When I could not sleep, instead of huddling in my bed, I wandered naked into the garden, swam in the pool, and if I got chilled, soon became warm again by soaking in a hot bath at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. And if I did not sleep until dawn, what did it matter? Because I could go on sleeping until late in the afternoon. Once I slept for 23 hours, but Daisy knew this was a sign of healing, so no one woke me to see if there was anything wrong. I had been at Hurtwood nearly a month when Mother wrote and said that all was forgiven and I could come home. "You had better come the day after tomorrow, as by now you must have outstayed your welcome. Be sure to thank both your hostesses for being so exceedingly hospitable." I showed the letter to Daisy. There were times when she took decisive action, and this was one of them. She rang up Mother and told her politely, but in a voice which allowed no argument, that I would return to Seacourt when she considered me ready to do so, which would not be for at least another 3 months. "Oh, darling Daisy, can I really stay?" I exclaimed as she briskly put down the receiver. She really looked surprised. "What silly question. Surely you have realized by now that this is your home." As I gradually became neither avid for sleep nor fearful of not sleeping, I began to dream of Esmond. There was no sudden breaking down of separation, but like a frosted plant, gradually feeling the rising sap, I became aware that I was seeing him, although I could not remember it. Then, leaf by leaf, dream memory unfolded. I was happy again, not radiantly happy as I had been for a little while, but quietly like a small green shrub on a summer evening. The quality of my dreams began to change. They were more vivid and yet more arduous to achieve. To meet him needed an effort of will, a great effort which left me exhausted in the morning. It was as though, to reach the country where we could be together, he had come to find me at the limit of his endurance, and then take me over a high range of mountains. Mountains that were as high as space, as wide as time. When we were safely there, I was always happy. The trees were yellow, although not with autumn, instead of green, and many of the flowers were unfamiliar. My body was much lighter, yet this was not because it was obedient to my thought, as in a dream. It was a material body, obeying a less stringent law of gravity, able to run faster, to leap higher, to swim further under water, but still in its own place, equally solid as the one I re-entered on waking. I had been there several times before Esmond told me that we were on a new planet. We arrived grown up already instead of being boys. I have decided to stay here and instead of having another turn on Earth. He laughed joyously. "It's so new, so clean. No diseases, not even unfriendly insects. Haven't you noticed what fun it is to lie on the grass without worrying whether you are being disturbing an ant's nest, to explore a tropical forest with no snakes or spiders or leeches?" "I thought it was a dream," I admitted. "I never have snakes or spiders in my dreams, only in nightmares." "Of course it isn't a dream, darling. It's real. If you don't believe me, try to change one of those trees into something else, and you will find it takes no notice and goes on just being a tree." "Then how do I get here, Esmond?" "It can't be solid, because my solid body is embedded hurtward." "Well, I didn't want to tell you yet, but you are not really here. You are only a visitor. I suppose you're really a kind of ghost. It's very hard work bringing you here, much more of an effort than if I had to row up to a mountain on skis. Bringing Earth ghosts here is not encouraged. It's considered a waste of energy, and energy is very important here when there is so much to create." "Oh, please, can I stay with you? If you keep me from going back to my body, it will run down like a clock, and then I shall be free of the wretched thing." For a moment he seemed regretful, but not more confident than a carefree adult would be, who had to deny a treat to a child who is far too young to enjoy it. "Your body is not really ready to die yet. You must use to live your own life in your own place. Your place is not my place anymore. You must live your life. And I awoke, hearing him say it. I had not been there since that night, nor have I dreamt again of Esmond. So that's the end of part 2 of this book. We're coming to part 3 now. This is Joan Grant. I hope you have a lovely Friday the 28th of July.